experience. Another option is, of course, open source engines. So Ogre 3D is a really fairly nice open source 3D graphics engine. Panda 3D is another engine that's intended more for educational purposes. Delta 3D, which is the military, is putting together an open source engine. Quake 3, which is actually an interesting crossover example that was originally a commercial engine that they decided to make open source eventually. Is there anybody here who doesn't know what open source is? Okay, that's nice. But the interesting thing when evaluating these things is that open source generally works as an ecosystem. That's what makes it work when it works. So it's kind of, whereas you could pick the features of Unreal versus, say, Quake or Doom 3 and make a good case by case. You've got to pay money to use one. You've got to pay money to use the other, so you have to select one. If you actually scratch the surface on most of these open source projects, they quite frequently are pulling very liberally from each other constantly. One group does something interesting. Other people say, yes, I will use that too because I have the source also, and you did a good job. But it also means that you get this kind of design by accretion. It's just, this is the best of what we found. And so there's no duplication, there's lots of duplication, and in particular, these systems are almost always built around that first paradigm I listed in terms of modularity. So here's my graphics rendering, and there's my physics engine. I'll just glue those together, and now it works. But what you don't find is any of the support for all of the game content sort of topics that I talked about, or occasionally there is, but it's not. Then it's kind of separated out, or you get very limited support for these kind of game features that are really important. And unfortunately, this means that even though you got something for free and that's cool, and it's not even bad software exactly, you're not getting tools, and you're not getting documentation, and you're not getting something where you can ask somebody, so you started with your idea and you took it to the end, how? Because often nobody actually did that part. They were interested in solving the physics problem. And they said, here world, I solved the physics problem. Well, that doesn't help me if I have to get real things into a game and have it running in real time. A final choice, which actually I'm sure people have seen a lot of success with it, obviously, is Adobe Flash, and now more recently Microsoft's got their own competitor in Silverlight. And so these are really more of toolkits. Flash, you couldn't really call it a game engine. In fact, it does some graphics. It can do some 2D collision. It's not very fast sometimes. But people have had really good success with it. And I think that if you evaluate these things from the kind of perspective I'm laying out here, I hope that maybe it makes it a little more clear why people can succeed with it when it has so many really gaping holes. Basically, they don't have the same kind of game systems in terms of what kind of graphics does it provide, what kind of physics does it provide, which it doesn't even really, and so on. But what they do is they do have very consistent tools and very consistent features. You know that all the things will work if they've implemented it at all. And even better, there's large communities of people who do Flash and write books about it. And there's actually a very large community of people who get production stuff out in the world. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to my recommendations, but I want to springboard off of this because I think that my sense from when I talk to people is there's a lot of people who maybe have had sort of success with Flash and that they've gotten something out the door. And then they say, oh, the reason that educational games aren't working is they don't look like the Doom 3, they don't look like the Half-Life 2. That must be Flash's fault. And I want to kind of throw out there that yes, but no. If you got really, really, really talented game developers and forced them to use Flash, what you would see you would probably be surprised by what you would see. In fact, maybe go look at the Nintendo DS because it's not especially powerful. That's maybe more the kind of games you get out of it. I think that it's useful to talk about what do people lose when they go from these kind of things like Flash to the open source engines or the commercial engines, and understand why that's a much harder process than maybe people expect. Generally, it's important to recognize that more isn't always better. These are my general recommendations, having looked at all this. More isn't always better. And again, think of something like the iPod, which knows its audience, says, here's what you need, and we remove the things you didn't. The unfortunate reality is the ideal game engine is one that does everything that you exactly need and doesn't do any more. You would think that, well, just get the thing that does everything and you've won. But unfortunately, that will be a slow engine, and it might have a lot of constraints about what it can put on the screen. But even worse, there's an enormous cognitive burden to working with these tools. If you haven't spent a lot of years working with these things, you'll be just absolutely amazed at how much you have to know to do little things. And that's where Flash kind of wins. They say, we know this is slower, but here. You can just put the thing on the screen, it's fine. And the game engines in general will say, you need to be fast, so you need to know the following things. Textures need to be a power of 2. And here's the rules about pre-processing tools, and on and on and on. More isn't always better, and that's an important thing to recognize. I imagine that there's ideally some sort of stopgap solution somewhere between Flash and commercial game engines that would actually be very ideal for educational game developers. And I wouldn't be surprised if, as Microsoft and Adobe battle it out, they'll start acquiring more of those features. It's absolutely essential to recognize that tools need skills, and often those skills are not documented anywhere. The reason that game makers can make really beautiful games is they put in 16 hours a day, 7 days a week for many years to learn with that process, and that information rarely diffuses out very well to the rest of the community. So even if you're given the tools, recognize that it's going to take a long time to build those skills, and also keep in mind, see if you're the kind of in a kind of situation where you can build those skills. So, for example, I've worked with a lot of professors who try to get their grad students to do stuff, and in addition to not being artists, their grad students just leave after a year or two. Well, the reality is all your expertise leaves with that grad student. They're not going to write it down somewhere. And so I think that, recognizing just the knowledge burden here, it's not just do you have the technology, it's do you have people who can use it. It's really difficult. Once again, I argue that design means leaving only the essentials. Paring down is really the way to succeed. And then this is a bit of a jump, but it does connect. Understand what it is you're doing with game design. I'm a firm believer that, much like you'll hear things about, say, Hitchcock and the way that he'd build tension in his films by knowing exactly what humans react to when they see it on the screen. And then you just need the illusion. I think that the more that people who are trying to make educational games can know what it is they're selling, know why are people responding to what they're doing, as the filament guy said. Maybe for the first presentation, maybe you do need something immersive enough that that level of technology is required. But for some of the other projects, much like the DEF CON example, maybe something iconic is exactly right for what people are busy doing. They're not busy looking at the graphics, they're busy interacting with the system. And so the more you can understand why people are getting things out of your game, the more you can make sure that you pick no more technology than you need, which I think, unless you're in a situation to really build up expertise over time, which is incredibly expensive, the least you can get away with while it's still attractive or has an interesting art style, the better off you'll be and the more and better chances of success you'll have. So that's it, and thanks a lot. If anybody has more needs about this kind of stuff, I'm always available to consult on it. So yeah, thanks.
We have a question for Nathan.
This is a really good talk. I'm glad to see something. This is really a technical talk, but it's something on the way to a technical talk. But I hear that you sort of cut it off at the knees by calling you to talk about open source gaming. Right?
Yeah.
There's a much more general lesson you're actually trying to impart, and I wonder if you could actually impart that now, rather than hiding it inside this argument about what I was saying. If I put words in your mouth, it's essentially the game development surprise is a cool happen. Right?
Yes, it absolutely is, and often it's a very nobody will really tell you how technical it is, so you just sort of jump in thinking, I think I can do this. We got the good engine. Well, no, that's going to end in tears. So yeah, I think that is my take-home point: is recognize why it's hard, or how hard it is, and try to recognize why it's hard, and that'll be the first step to making sure you're taking on things you can do. Yeah, it's actually off of the Academic Collabs website here. So. All right.
Comment on the question. I agree with all your points, but I just want to say that there's another application out there that you just mentioned called Unity that's currently Macintosh only game walkthrough environment that costs a bit more than Tor, but it's their goal, the developer's goal really is to create the game development equivalent of Final Cut Pro. To have that level of usability
Right.
and power. And it's still much more technical than Flash.
Sure.
But it brings a lot of power and has all those elements that you described. I just wanted to mention that because the version 2 is coming out late summer and it's going to be really phenomenal.
Yeah, I fully expect, there's this irony here that all of the knowledge about how to do this stuff is kind of encoded in the game industry. And it's kind of a mystery as to why, say, id Software or Epic Software hasn't said, wow, we make a lot of money selling to, these experts, but what if we were the Photoshop of this space? Or what if we were, the Notepad of this space, whatever. But it almost seems like it's a motivation problem. The game makers like being on the cutting edge. They like making the thing that nobody's ever seen before. They don't have a whole lot of interest in finding out how to strip it down. And as a great example of that, Flash is not doing anything that wasn't already being done in game engines, in 94, 95. It's just that game makers were like, we have our experts. They know how to make the stuff. That's fine. And so I absolutely expect a lot more diffusion of this kind of stuff and much more exploration of how do you make this stuff approachable to like normal people.
Something that might interject about Flash. I've been working with it since it was Future Splash Animator.
Sure.
And what Macromedia / Adobe now is trying to do with it is they're trying to turn it into an application development player.
Yeah, a lot of like Flex and stuff,
although
right?
The game side, it is an amazing tool for game design. They've got other plans.
Yeah, it's the same thing that the same way that like Microsoft's clearly known that their bread is buttered by targeting like smaller businesses or whatever. Like they know where the money is coming from, and I'm sure that it's interesting to watch those two kind of jostle for position in certain ways. But what's the future hold, right? So.